Maybe just try this again.
Yeah, let's share, and then you can use the 3 dots maybe.
Let's try this. I can't see my own screen for some reason now. It's the strangest thing.
Yeah, I see my name there, Sarah Shuja. I don't.
Okay, wait. This is the strangest thing because we've just tested this.
I know.
Fine, and here we go again. I can just not understand why this would happen the whole time.
Is your presentation open? Do you want to directly share your presentation?
Maybe get onto a second screen here for a moment.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much. Thanks, guys, for bearing with me for a second or two. This is the strangest thing when technology kicks in. It always catches us off guard. So thanks, Harish, for the lovely introduction, and thanks so much, everybody, for being here. As Harish has said, you know, both myself and Salome are from South Africa, so Salome being one of the leading leaders in change transformation in teaching and learning at University of Pretoria. And obviously, me being from McGraw Hill side, we work very closely with universities, not only to provide you with content, but to also be your teaching and learning partner to discover, you know, ways in which you can align your content and your teaching methodology, etc. So I'm going to try, because we only have 60 minutes, and give you, you know, a very short but concise overview of how you can align your teaching curriculum and activities for constructive learning and meaningful learning. And then Salome will be presenting with me and sharing some of the own real-life academia experience and examples as we go. But as yet, feel free to please, you know, I can't see the chat box at the moment, but we'll go back to it after the presentation. So if you have any questions or comments, you know, happy to answer them. Also, what we were covering today in this session is the context. Why is there a need for alignment? Then the learning design approach. What is alignment? How do we actually help faculty members to strengthen your own capacity, to increase your student participation, and to drive active learning? And that incorporates best learning practices, and then to have a look at impact assessments and any follow-up activities that will enhance the integrity and ethics. Now, this is, I mean, all of these, you can probably spend hours on just one topic by itself. So today's session will be, you know, briefly overview, but we're very happy to run separate sessions with anybody that would be interested to go more deeper into each of these topics. So let us know if you need anything more specific content, or maybe a separate session where we can help you address any of this. So firstly, I think what we can't, you know, do away with is that a lot has changed in the education environment that we live and work in. You know, coming over the past 30 years, a lot has changed, and the way that we as instructors and providers of content, as well as students, live in this world, it keeps on evolving. And specifically over the past 2.5 years, when we saw this terrible pandemic hitting us, you know, even more so did we experience that there's a massive shift in how our students perceive education and being taught. So, you know, when we have to look at the first century student, we know that there's a massive change in needs for them. Firstly, the way that they perceive a university or a college degree has evolved. It's not like 20 years ago where everybody knew exactly they would be going, studying a degree or certificate or whatever qualification, getting a textbook, going to lectures, writing exams. The way that we as instructors teach has also evolved. It has moved very much from just chalk and talking to adapting our teaching styles. And then the way that institutions as a whole run and track student performance has evolved. At this point in time, big data and small data are really relevant for us to understand. So when we just look at the students, firstly, we know that they expect to go into an education sector or institution and study something that will get them job ready, but that is also personalized and dynamic and engaging. So the generation of students that we're dealing with wants to be involved. They want to be part of the process. They want activities to involve them in learning. Also, instructors are now being tasked and asked to provide more teaching assistance outside of just the classroom, whether the classroom is face-to-face or online or in blended environment, a virtual classroom. A lot of pressure is put on instructors to do more teaching outside of that hour or that 40 minutes slot that you have with your students. And the drive is obviously to drive student performance and to incorporate new solutions, digital solutions. But to keep the motivation high with our students, that will obviously drive the engagement and hopefully student success and outcomes. I mean, from an institutional side of view, we know that institutions are faced with a lot of competition for student enrollment. Certainly in South Africa, and I'm sure it's across everywhere, we have a number of private universities and a number of public universities. So students have the variety of choice as to where they want to go and study. And institutions need to always remain up to date and up to speed and available with the latest and best teaching technologies and methodologies to make sure that they attract students, but more than that, that they actually track the learning outcomes and ensure that the students that leave with a qualification leaves with a successful qualification and can add to the workforce market at the end of the day. Now, something that we talk a lot about is basically whatever we teach needs to be significant and meaningful in terms of learning. And as I said, a few years ago, and when I say a few, we're talking 20, 30 years ago, learning meant that a student got their textbook, they went to a class, they got their assignment, and they wrote a test. But now we know that learning has changed. So when we talk about significant and meaningful learning, it means that we focus on what the student learn and not so much what we teach. This also then changes the way that we design our modules. No longer can we just design a module around a list of topics to say, well, here's my prescribed textbook. I'm working from chapter 1 to 20, and here's the topics. We need to, not design our courses to be content-centered, which they were for many years, but now to move towards a learning-centered approach. And that means that we understand right from the beginning of every module that it is that we want students to learn. What can they learn? What should they learn? And once we start following those processes, we can see that change occurs in students. The way that they study, the way that they engage, and the way that they succeed does change. Now, the basic principles of learning has remained. Thomas Angelo, I think, developed these in the late 70s, early 80s, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm sure a lot of the people in the audience already know these principles, and probably better than I do. The thing is that the principles of learning has not changed over years. What has changed is the way that we incorporate principles of learning to drive engagement with our students, to make sure that it's aligned and to create that learning-centeredness opposed to a content-centeredness. Now, just to quickly touch on the principles of learning is to create engagement and learning-centeredness. So firstly, we want to engage our students into an active learning environment and not just a passive learning environment where they come to a class or attend a virtual class or watch a video and they basically just an audience. We want to make sure that they collaborate with instructors, with tutors, with probably the technology simulations and systems, as well as with their peers. Then it's really important to connect any prior knowledge or any new information with their prior knowledge. As I always discuss with academia, and we all know that there's so much information around for our students that we find that students these days are quite informative about a lot of subjects. They know quite a lot about what's going on in the world because they get exposed to it. So whatever we teach, we'll probably be able to find some information that we could connect to their prior knowledge. Then problem solving is that, we want students not to only learn and to recall facts. We want them to think critically. We want them to go through the thought process and to apply. So to make sure that we engage students in problem solving, which will ultimately enable them to be more successful in the working environment. Then when and that all, goes around engagement. Then when we have our content, we need to make sure that we structure and organize our content in meaningful ways. And when we say meaningful ways, it means that it needs to be aligned to the actual outcome and not just information that we're giving to them. Because we're going to talk a bit about assessment later, but all of this needs to be aligned. Then to provide, enough feedback to our students. But not only to provide feedback, abundant feedback, timeless feedback, and specific. Again, this is not only this generation, even the previous generation, I think, some of us as well. We want to know exactly where we are, how we're doing right now. We don't want to wait for an end of the semester test to know what we're struggling with. And we sit with large classes, and Salome is going to talk a little bit about that at some point. But it's difficult to always make sure that you give 3,000 students specific, timelessly, and abundant feedback. But we need to make sure that we give that feedback to our students, and that's what they expect. And that's also a driver of success. Then when we talk about assessment, we need to assess for understanding and not just for recalling facts. Once students understand and they really get involved in the specific content, that's when they can start to apply it. That's when they can start to analyze that. And we're moving them, by that we're moving them into, the higher level thinking concepts. Not that we, Bloom's taxonomy does not have to start at the bottom and move to the top. It can start anywhere, but it's really to take them to that higher level. Then again, to find, real world applications and to contextualize that for them, what they're seeing in the world, what they're hearing in the world, what's happening, to link that to the theory that we're teaching to them, and to then focus on the explicit aims and the intended outcomes of the course. So always keep that together. So these have always been the learning principles. How we've applied them has just changed over the past few years. Now, the one thing that we need to understand is that we need to align our teaching and our content and there's so much going on around.
Has stopped. This meeting is being recorded.
Can you still hear me, Suresh?
Yes, I can.
Oh, sorry, I got a voice note.
I know, me too. I was like, what is this?
I thought something's off. Anyway, so there's so much around us. Our students, as well as our lecturers, we are all involved in some way in this digital space. We talk, some people are talking about the metaverse, but there's so much that's available to us that we actually need to start organizing what is applicable for us to use. Because otherwise we will just overkill it by adding so much, which in the end will just be distracting to our students and confusing them. Now, the next slide I'm showing you is just like a little comic. When we talk about alignment and bringing course interactivity into our courses, and I'm talking prior the pandemic, and even a few years ago when learning technology became quite a thing that a lot of universities took on board, instructors would feel the pressure to all of a sudden add some interactivity into their course, and people would just reach out for a lot of things. As you saw on the previous slide, there's so much available. So by just taking things like videos, interesting articles, maybe a little bit of simulation, maybe a game, maybe some web interface, does not take care of interactivity. So this is just a comic, thing that the guy says, well, my course lacks interactivity, and I assumed that a software would take care of that. And that's the biggest mistake that anybody can make. There's so much available, and it's good technology that's available from a lot of producers out there or content providers. But we need to make sure that whatever we do incorporate into our courses will actually align with our learning outcomes and what we want our students to learn. Otherwise, we're just giving our students stuff, more stuff to do, more things that we dump onto the LMS or into your learning environment. Now, constructive alignment on itself is a big topic that we can deliver an hour and a half course around. But when I refer to constructive alignment, there's a few aspects. So firstly, the constructive part refers to what the student does, that the student takes responsibility to do certain activities and learning activities that will construct meaning for them. So if we give them an article to read or a web link to visit or an online survey or a video or a simulation, whatever, that it is actually constructing the learning in a meaningful way to our students. And it's not just because we felt we added it to our students. Then the alignment piece sits with the teacher. It makes sure that, whatever we actually produce out to our students aligns to what we and supports our learning outcomes, and that the activities are appropriate and appropriately designed to achieve those learning outcomes. And in terms of teaching methods used and the assessment tasks, that these are aligned to the learning activities and the actions to the intended outcomes. I'm going to talk a little bit about assessments in 1 or 2 slides, but assessment should never sit outside of your alignment or your teaching methodology. It should be completely integrated in what we do. Now, this is just a very simplified slide that we use to illustrate this. And what we say is that when we start aligning for significant learning, we take an integrated course design approach. So we all have our every course has specific learning outcomes. That's what, around what we build our courses and our modules. Then together with that, we design activities for our students, whether it's online activities, quizzes, group work, whatever it might be. And then we have the assessment and the feedback side. Now, if all of that does not align, students become disengaged, and we see that they do not meet the end of the module requirements. But once you manage to take all of these 3 and keep them aligned the whole time with the learning outcome in mind and whatever drives the best practice for student learning, we find that the learner has a significant learning experience. We had a lecturer the other day that actually called it that aha moment, when you can see the penny drops for the student. So if all of this sits in different places, students might say, well, okay, well, I don't get this. I'm reading from this textbook or this content piece, but now you're asking me something different there in the assessment. Or this was my content, but throughout the semester, I was tested on MCQs, but I got to the assessment side, and now you give me a long question or a case study to answer. So that's where the disengagement happens. And if we always keep in mind to keep those aligned, we find that we have that significant learning moment. Then I've just said that the principles of learning has not changed, but so has the principles of learning design not changed. So we have the principles of learning, but then there's a set of principles of learning design. These have also not changed, but again, the way that we utilize them now and apply them, that is what has changed. So just to touch on them very lightly, again, this is a whole module on its own, is that for learning design, we need to make sure that our learning outcomes and aims are clear and that it aligns to everything else. We also need to create an opportunity for students to apply their knowledge, not just to be spectators and to be tested. So we build their knowledge through experience. Then in terms of assessment, to use assessment as a strategic tool to enhance learning. Assessment should be part of learning and not testing learning. It should be part of the learning process. Then to have an inclusive approach to learning, so collaboration, make students part of the process, and you can do that with activities. to give students opportunity for self-directed learning. At McGraw specifically, we have a lot of adaptive and personalized learning technologies that in the end gives the student the opportunity for a deeper engagement and reflection on their own progress and their own shortfalls or shortcomings in specific areas. To provide our students with clear signposting, and that normally sits within our study guides. But you can also do that by incorporating that into the design of your course to, always say to students, here's your milestones. At these certain points, you should be able to have achieved this. And again, by including certain technologies, the student can always see where they are opposed to where you want them to be. And the same for the lecturer. You can see exactly where your students are opposed to where you want them to be. Then to have multiple points of feedback, not only a memo at the end of a test or a tutorial feedback session, to make sure that there's abundance of opportunities where they receive feedback. For students to have the opportunity to learn collaboratively, and that can be in a virtual world. It doesn't always have to be face-to-face in group worlds, and then to provide your evaluation and feedback. Now, I'm going to hand over to Salome at this point. As said, University of Pretoria has, long before pandemics, etc., they started moving towards a transitioning to firstly blended hybrid teaching models, and they took on this whole approach of the triangle that I showed. So I'm going to hand over to Salome to just share with you some of her insights and the practicalities around this. So thank you, Salome. I'll change the slides for you. You can just, indicate to me as and when to go.
Thank you, Madeleine. Hi, everyone. I think, before I tell you how we did it, I just need to give you a little bit of background. The University of Pretoria is basically a university that follows a traditional approach where we use textbooks that are printed. We have formal classes that we teach every day, and then they make use of formal exam type of assessments where the students meet in a venue, and they write under supervision the exams. The thing is, a couple of years ago, in our department, we have about 11,000 students. And at that stage, we only had 22 lecturing staff. So we had a situation where our classes, it was astronomical. I mean, you walk into a first year's class and there are 800 students in front of you. And in that moment, you turn from a lecturer into a public speaker. And a lot of the things that contribute to learning falls away just because of the size of the group in front of you, as it is impossible for one person to give all 800 of them, individual attention. So we started to look for ways in which we can better the engagement of the students, in terms of the content. So OBS 100 is the first year subject. It is a foundation subject where we basically teach them, all the basic theories and processes and structures that we use in management so that they can apply that as they move on, through their 3 years of formal study. So we started with, and I think, this was the first thing that worked very well for us. The first thing that we did was we moved away from prescribing a textbook, and we started to use content from different sources, that we got from the McGraw authors. And instead of deciding on a book and then formulating your learning outcomes, we did it the other way around. We had our learning outcomes, and then we started to look for the best content that fitted into that. And it really made a difference in terms of, what you are teaching, because I think a lot of you will agree with me, you can have a very good book, but most of the books will just lack that one thing that you would still like to add to the course, and then you don't use it. So we made sure, and I think that is the first thing in terms of the alignment, that our content spoke to the learning outcomes. Which also address, I think, a lot of the issues later on as the module progressed. questions such as, but what are we writing the test on? You can just refer them back to the study guide to say, what, here's what you have to study. This is what you need to know. It's all in the study guide. So there's no confusion. They know exactly right from the start, this is what they are going to get, and the content and the examples are relevant. Then in terms of engagement, it's very difficult to get a big class to engage with content. I think a lot of them just attend classes because they have to. But what we did here, and I think, this worked very well, is we used the adaptive reading or the smart book technology that McGraw offered. And we set it up in a way that the students had to do the Learn Smart activities before they actually attended a formal class. So when they entered the class, we didn't necessarily stand there and teach theory, but we could actually, do things like case studies, and interact and do discussions with them about the content to help them to apply it to real life situations. What is also nice about the Learn Smart exercises, it's low stake assessment. So, even if they make a mistake, it doesn't really affect their marks in a negative way, but the technology also takes them back, to where the correct answer in the textbook is. And that is really something that enhances learning. And when you speak to our students, they will say, in retrospect, they might have not liked it when they had to do it the night before class, but in retrospect, that was the thing that really helped them to master the content. And then, in terms of the learning centeredness, we speak about low stake assessments. And like I said, the platform really allowed us, to continuously make exercises and examples and case studies available for them that they can practice. I think it boosted their confidence, before they actually went into the formal assessments. And during the pandemic, we also used the platform, to conduct our formal semester tests on, without any problems, because the system gives you that flexibility, in terms of the settings. Can they access their resources, or can't they do anything? Which was really, it became really a big aid. And then also in terms of feedback, we know that feedback is very important. If you use the test banks, obviously the questions, you can set it so that it gives them the right answers at the end. So it really filled the gap for us, where we couldn't be in person, right? To make, the content and, the classes, engaging and something, where that, or a class where they actually learn something that is meaningful. Thank you, Madeleine.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Salome. And just, to also, mention something that we saw the students also use is, in terms of the feedback, it's not only, we saw the students did not only, once they did quizzes or tests, got the feedback in real time. The specific technology also provides students with student-centered reports that shows to them what are their most common learning challenges at that specific moment. What are the topics that they're struggling with? And it would self-direct them to additional material and reading and examples and practice material for them. So students, without the lecturer providing them with that feedback, or just getting a memo with the right or wrong answer and the correct answer, what that it should be, together with the explanation, it also gave them some feedback in terms of where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to learn. So they were so prepared when it got to the point of formal assessments. or the, the summative assessments. Now, this is just, and I'm showing you an example. This was the type of template that we use when we assist universities from our side and faculties to design that. Is that we spoke about, we look at the learning outcomes, your feedback assessment, and your activities. But you basically start from, obviously, looking at your learning outcomes. So, where do I want my students to go? What is that significant learning I want them to achieve? But then looking at the right-hand side, what are the types of activities and the material that I'm going to use per learning outcome to have my students have that engaging learning and meaningful learning, and the type of activities and assessment, or that would drive that. And then in the middle, you start looking at your assessment. So how do I now link up my assessments, whether it's formative assessments or summative assessment? How do I create assessment to sit in the middle of all of this, so that at the end of the day, it drives active learning, it drives the student, it prepares them for whatever is to come? And that's where we saw success. Once you first have your learning activity or your learning outcomes, then design your learning activities around that, and then to make sure that you also design the type of assessment for your students. So this was just an example of a template that we use. Now the last part of this is obviously then the assessment part. How do we create assessments and follow-up activities that will help our students to firstly enhance the learning experience, but to also guide the university's integrity and ethics. Now I'm going to hand back to Salome in a bit, but the one thing that we need to understand, and after that I'm going to hand back to Salome, is that assessments, as I mentioned earlier, should be part of learning. That in these smaller assessments, whether they are formative, summative assessment types, that they prepare the student for the end test, and that it helps them through the learning journey. Professor David Bout, who's the director of the Center for Research at Deakin University, which maybe some of you might know him, actually said this very valuable thing, that assessment practices are the single most influential driver of what our students do. So assessment should not just be the measure of outcomes, but it should be a means to develop lifelong learning. Something that it's not just a cramming of facts and regurgitating that. Assessment should therefore actually be more of an inclusion at the end, or more than just an inclusion at the end of a module. Although some people might argue that there should be separate places for formative and summative assessment, where we've seen from experience that if your formative assessment completely not the questions repeat itself, but the way that you formatively provide your students with assessments throughout the term or the semester, if that is the same way in which you're going to test them in your summative assessments, we see great success, and that students actually learn. It's not just for that one day that they cram and recall facts. So Salome, I'm going to hand over back to you to just talk from an institutional point of view around the purpose of assessments.
Thank you. Right, so what is the purpose of assessment? I think, ultimately, if you look at it in a very basic form, a student needs to pass the assessment in order to get, the qualification. So it is, in fact, a very important part of the learning process. Also what I found is that, specifically with undergrad students, if you don't give them marks for something, they're not necessarily very eager to do it. So it also becomes, I think, a motivator for them, to actually engage with the material, and therefore, quizzes and things like Learn Smart activities, it's important to make that part of their semester mark. So I think the first thing to consider is, when we talk about low stake formative assessment, is that we should provide them with opportunities throughout the semester to practice, to make mistakes, when it is in a safe environment where it doesn't really affect either their marks negatively to a great extent. And then I also think, in terms of frequency, they need to get into a routine of participating and of doing these things, to make sure that they stay engaged with the content continuously and not just, the night before they're writing a semester test. And then they also said that low-stake assessments can be structured to help students to prepare for high-stake assessments. And I think, if you use it correctly, it can take a lot of the uncertainty or the anxiety that they might experience before a big assessment. I think it can take it away, and make sure that they ease into that. You can move on, Madeleine.
Thank you. Okay, so just in terms of, and again, this is just a very quick comparison around the low stake, your formative and your high stake assessments, your summative assessments, is that a lot of times we say that our low stake assessments has a low or no point value. And as Salome just mentioned, we know that if students don't gain anything from anything, they won't do it. And if we want to make assessments part of learning, we need to make sure that there is some point value to students in terms of low stake assessment. The benefit of this is obviously that it gives students a realistic idea of their performance frequently throughout the term, and it allows instructors by utilizing reports to direct students to more resources to see where they're falling down. We have, a lot of lecturers actually utilize the low stake or the formative assessment reports to see what were the most challenging learning objective topics, questions that their students struggled with. So by the time that they get to class, they're able to focus on specific issues, or rest assured that, students all have the baseline theory and they can address high level concepts in class with students, again, making it more engaging and to elevate that learning experience. With high stake assessments, obviously we want to evaluate the student's performance at that point and compare it against the benchmark of achievement. So that's your formative test, your high level test, and their students obviously, it counts towards a large percentage of their marks, and it's a much more controlled environment. But as Salome mentioned, if you prepare your students frequently throughout the semester with those low stake assessments, they do not suffer from that anxiety when they actually get to the actual big semester test or the summative assessments. And then there's just a few examples, and these differ. There's different material, as I said before, of what you can use for formative versus summative assessments. So that's just a very brief differentiation between the two, which I'm sure everybody's very familiar with. Now, I'm just going to introduce the academic integrity and then again hand back to Salome, because, being the expert from the university, is that we all as providers of education want to make sure that, there's integrity and academic integrity, and that becomes a big issue, especially once you move into the online world. But as we all know, we cannot just expect our students to act in ways that are respectful, towards academic integrity, if you do not explain to them what it is and why it's so important. So Salome, I'm going to hand over to you for the last few slides here.
Okay.
Are you still there, Salome? Sorry.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. Okay, so what can we do, to enhance integrity in terms of our assessments? And I think, as academics, we talk about this, quite often, especially within the environment that we are operating now. I think it became more difficult. It's easier when students go into a venue, they are invigilators, they're not allowed to take in bags or books, and they sit down, and they write the exam, although we still catch them cheating even in a setting like that. But I think one of the most important things, that we've learned is to set the learning objectives early. It set expectations. And like I said earlier, it takes away some of the anxiety And they also know, what exactly must they do, in order to achieve the objectives of the subject. Then also very important is to line your content with your assessment. Um, we see it many times, and I think, it's probably not just a problem that we have in South Africa, but and in my field, but all of our, or most of our best writers, they come from the USA. So the examples and the case studies that they use, in the traditional textbooks, are based um, on organizations in the USA and not necessarily, within South Africa. So you need to create um, context, from that, within the environment that we have. Yeah. Um, and I think, it's very important, and we'll get to that then, that you actually, you take time and think, how are you going to align, the content, with what you did in class, so that it gets to assessment, and everything speaks to each other. Then also, to build relationships with students. I know it's difficult, in a big class setting, but I think, when you are presenting a class, and you are available, they do get to learn you, to know you, and in the end, I think, it makes a difference, to the motivation in what they put into the module. Also, what we did, in order to help us with that, is we also appointed a few tutors that were really actively involved, with the students on a continuous basis. And then also, you know, I think it is important to raise awareness about academic misconduct early in the course. Tell them early onwards, that this is what you consider the misconduct. This is what plagiarism is. We just assume, because we are academics, that they know what plagiarism is. But the new generation, they live in the information age where they can basically obtain anything from Google. And I don't think they necessarily think that when they use that, that they are actually, um, you know, committing plagiarism. So what I do is I put, for example, on our learning management system, there's a whole section where I explain to them, this is how you interpret a Turnitin report. That is a software that we use. There's videos that explain the concept. So when they start to submit assessments, they are fully aware of that. And then, of course, of the consequences. The next slide, Madeleine. Right. In terms of exam design, the use of frequent low-stake assessments, it makes a difference. And it really enhances, I think, the learning experience, and then, of course, the results that you obtain at the end of the semester. Then also you can use multiple.
I wonder whether we've lost Salome. Salome, are you still there?
Can you hear me now?
Okay. Sorry, yeah, we can. Sorry, it's this whole thing with load shedding and connections in South Africa. So sometimes we drop off. But as long as you're there, please continue.
Okay, so
we lost you. Multiple exam format.
The multiple exam for okay, sorry. Okay, so we can use different formats for exams. For example, we can use a multiple choice. That allows you to test for a broad set of knowledge. We also like to use, case studies where students actually go and they apply the knowledge that they've learned, in a practical scenario. And I think, the fact that although you are testing theory, but they can't look for the answers, in a textbook or on Google or whatever aids they have available. I really think that also contributes to the integrity, of the assessment method. And then also, lastly, is to balance formative and summative assessments. to support the end-to-end assessment. Your formative assessments, such as quizzes and midterms, allow students to receive feedback on their progress. And feedback is a way to learn. It is a way to show them where they maybe need to, focus more of their attention to, that will in the end, make the final exam a little bit easier. Okay, the next slide, Madeleine. Right, so what can you do? Do we have a delay?
No, I'm saying I think there's a bit of a delay between me and you sitting in different locations. But I've got the next slide for you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so what can we do? Now, speaking from my own experience, and it works well within my subject. In the subject that I teach, is we can use mini case studies that requires the application of the course content. So you're actually, forcing the student to think a little bit, to apply the theory to a scenario. And I think it also creates context between what they are studying and what, they can expect one day, when they leave the university and they enter the workforce. Then also another thing that you can do, to enhance this is not to reveal the correct answers on quizzes or exams, while they're writing it, or even afterwards, because students are quite innovative when it comes to, helping each other out. So by not giving them the exam paper with the answers, or the memo for that matter afterwards, to copy, and to use again, I think for us it worked very well. Then also, in terms of online assessments, if you have a pool that is big enough and it randomly selects some of your questions to make sure that your students don't get the same papers. And then, of course, with that, you always need to randomize, the answers. Although it might not be 100%, cheat proof, I think, at least it will make it more difficult for them, to assist each other. Then also one thing that works very well is to only show one question at a time, and not the whole paper. So you force them to go through the questions one by one. Then also to rotate or to modify 1/3 of objective type questions in each exam. To set time limits. I think we came to the agreement that, even if they can access course material or information that can aid them, the moment that you put a time limit there, the student who relies only on looking for answers, he or she will run out of time, before completing the assessment. So that became a really a big aid. And then also, I think, making the exams available, for a specific time, set a formal time when it starts and when it ends, so the student can't access and keep on accessing your formal assessment continuously.
Okay. I think that's it. Yeah, sorry, Salome, you can I think that we could still hear you. I'm not sure if anybody dropped off, but I could still hear the last part. Okay, so that basically, colleagues, brings us to the end of this presentation, and we basically spot on time. I will quickly check the chat box to just see if there's any specific questions that people have that we can answer for you, but please feel free to put anything in the chat that the Q&A.
Madeline, there is one that's come up. I don't know if you saw it from Gamil. There is one question that came in the Q&A. That's for different curriculum designs, content-centered, project-based, research-based. How can the assessment be aligned with the designed curriculum?
Okay, so I'm just seeing the question. Let me just rewrite. I'm just reading it on the screen. Just give me 1 second, Suresh.
No problem. I'm just reading it for the audience because they will not be able to see the question.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly read through it.
I think that, Camille, that is what Salome was talking about, the assessment and how you can align the summative one.
Yeah, well, I mean, Salome, feel free to jump in. From my side, you know, what we've been doing is obviously, you know, some of the modules are still content designed or project based, and you find that you know, a lot of times in the science faculties, etc. But what we do is that we there's a lot of material available that you can, like simulations, like labs, that you can make part of your assessment, your formative assessment that prepares them for the summative assessment. So when you design your actual curriculum and you want to keep it content centered, is to you know, then jump back to your, when we, you know, we look at that table of how we design curriculum, is to look at the different activities, that you can put out throughout the semester, and then to see what assessment types are available. I mean, assessment types can sometimes be, you know, handing in a project, or doing an online simulation in a simulated environment. I mean, there's a lot of simulations available, or to have some of these application-based activities in your formative assessments throughout the semester. But then when you get to your actual summative assessments, you know, you could provide them with an actual case or a video case scenario where they have to then analyze and apply. Camille, I hope that answers your question. Salome, you have anything to add there? Salome, you're on mute.
Camille says thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think with our connection we might have lost Salome's back. Salome, so you were mute and you were lost for a moment.
No, I think you answered that. No, I think you answered it, you know, perfectly. There was another question, I think, you know, maybe where I can add something a little bit earlier about how can we make the assessment part of the learning rather than just testing. And I'm just speaking from my experience now, you know, in terms of what we did with the first years. When we introduced the Learn Smart activities, we introduced it as a reading exercise. And we explained to them why is reading so important, you know, in university studies. So it wasn't seen as a test right from the start, but it was rather, I think, seen, you know, as an activity, you know, that was part of the process. And then, you know, they saw how that helped them, you know, in terms of the class discussions. So although they were practicing, you know, low-stake assessments, they were getting more familiarized, you know, with the type of questions and how their formal assessment will look. You know, it was still an activity that they did and that they enjoyed, that became part of, you know, our learning process, you know, throughout the semester.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, just for you know, for anybody that's not familiar, you know, when we talk about the reading activities, and for people that might not be familiar with Learn Smart and Smart Book, you know, that's basically our adaptive ebook. And this is where the part comes in. You know, we will always say that when you work on the principles of scaffolding of learning, we obviously want to take the least interactive part of learning outside of the classroom, so that when you have class, and always when I refer to classroom, remember this could be virtual classroom or face-to-face classroom, that, you know, when you do have that classroom time, you want to really focus on teaching. So we take the least interactive part, which is reading, outside. But because Smart Book is an adaptive reading experience where the student has to read, then the system will test their current knowledge state and measure it against what the learning outcomes or the topics that the lecturer had identified for them to master. You know, it will redirect them to go and either watch additional material in terms of a video, read more about this, or it would highlight pieces in the book that they still have to cover and read again to get that conceptual knowledge. And this is why students, you know, it counts towards a mark, so it's still formative assessment, but it does not feel to the students as if they're just getting a reading activity. They're actually learning and engaging, and we know that we can progress and track, you know, as instructors where they're lacking, but the student himself gets that personalized help the whole time.
I think
Okay.
Madeline put it in a very great way, by the way. It's about the student and how the way you've connected it makes so much sense. Thank you.
Perfect. And as I said before, you know, if even after the workshop, if you know anything comes to mind, I know Sarish is going to share the recording with everybody, but please feel free to reach out to us should you want more information. If there's a need for us to go a bit deeper with a separate session on anything, as said, you know, 60 minutes is a very short time to really delve into these things. But hopefully this gave everybody quite a good overview from the start to the actual, you know, applying it and how it makes a difference.
Yes, and if you want a follow-up session also, you can let us know and we can obviously set that up for you. But we're at the end of our time. I do want to thank our speakers, Madeline and Salome, for sharing so much with us. Thank you so much. It was a fantastic session.
It's only a pleasure. Thank you so much for everybody, and thanks for the opportunity, and all the best for everybody.
And also
in
want
Saudi.
to thank the audience. Thank you for being here and listening to us so well. We will be sharing the recording, like I said. I've also shared the next week, we will be covering the topic of moral values for students. So it's going to cover a lot of integrity and cheating. If you're facing that in your class, you can register for those sessions. There, again, we're offering it 2 times, once in the morning, once in the evening. They're both the same sessions, but you can attend whichever one is suitable for you. I've dropped the link in the chat box. See you next time. Thank you so much for being such an amazing audience, and have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.